Hello and welcome to today's lesson. In previous lessons, we've looked at sexual and asexual reproduction. We've looked at meiosis, a form of cell division that forms things known as gametes. Gametes are sperm and egg cells or reproductive cells of organisms. I want to start today's lesson off with a quick starter. On the board there is a picture of a beautiful baby with beautiful blue eyes, and I would like you to think about the question, why do people have blue eyes? Pause the video now, press play when you're ready to go over the answers. So every trait or characteristic that we have, if it's a form of genetic variation, we inherit from our parents in things known as alleles. Alleles come as two different types, both dominant and recessive. In order to have blue eyes, you need to inherit a recessive allele from both parents, which will give you blue eyes. So today's title is Genetics. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recall the two types of reproduction utilized by living organisms. You should be able to use genetic terms such as genotype, phenotype, homozygous and heterozygous, and you should be able to explain how some human conditions can be caused by recessive alleles. So can you put the title in your books as you would do for any other lesson, genetics? Can you put the date? And we'll get on with the lesson to answer these three questions. So we have spoken about this before, but it's well worth us revisiting it to keep it fresh in your mind. So the first keyword today, remember all keywords are in green, is the word asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction can be defined as a form of reproduction, where there is only one parent and fertilization does not take place. And I'm going to put this in red because it's important. And fertilization does not take place. Now, essentially, asexual reproduction creates clones of the parent organism. So if I was to reproduce asexually, I would produce a child. There would probably be a part of me that breaks off, or a bud that grows on me that falls off, and that bud would grow into another Mr. Abraham. I know it's hard to believe that there would be two of me. However, that is how asexual reproduction works. So we can put underneath here that it makes clones of the parent. Okay? So the offspring are genetically identical to the parent. So I'm also going to add underneath there in red, because it's important, that offspring are genetically identical to the parent. Okay? Asexual reproduction relies on mitosis. So asexual reproduction uses mitosis as a form of cell division. Okay? Now, this is different to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is a form of reproduction where two parents are involved and fertilization does take place. Okay? And fertilization does take place. Okay? So sexual reproduction is a form of reproduction where two parents are involved and fertilization does take place. Now, in an exam, lots of pupils fall into the mistake of when they're asked what sexual reproduction is, they say it's when two people have sex. People can have sex without necessarily reproducing. Okay, you can have sex without having a child. Sexual reproduction is where fertilization takes place to create offspring. Okay? Now, this makes offspring that are not genetically identical to the parent, but they have similar characteristics from both the mom and the dad. So we can say underneath here that offspring are not genetically identical to parents. So you look nothing like your mom. You are not identical to your dad. However, you have some characteristics that are similar. So, for example, you may have your mom's nose and your dad's eyes. You may have your mom's hair. You may have your dad's height. Yeah, these are just things that are coming off the top of my head. Sexual reproduction relies on meiosis and fertilization. So it relies on meiosis and fertilization. Fertilization can be defined as when two gametes fuse together or two gametes join. So when two gametes join. Now, gametes are sex cells, such as the sperm and the egg. Okay? So a gamete can be defined as the male and female sex cells. Oh, help if I switch back to white. Male and female sex cells. Okay? Now, when sexual reproduction takes place, half of the chromosomes come from mom, half of the chromosomes come from dad, and this makes up what's known as the offspring's genotype. So the male sex cell, the sperm, provides half of the chromosomes. The female sex cell provides the other half of the chromosomes to make a complete organism. So I'm going to put in regs, it's important. We can say during sexual reproduction, comma, half of the offspring's chromosomes come from the mother, come from the mother's gamete, and the other half come from the father's gamete. And the other half from the father's gamete. This makes the offspring's genotype. This makes the offspring's genotype. So because it's pretty scrolling, I'm trying to save space over here. We've said that during sexual reproduction, half of the offspring's chromosomes come from the mother's gamete and the other half come from the father's gamete. This makes the offspring's genotype. Which brings us to our next keyword, genotype. Genotype, G-E-N-O-T-Y-P-E. Now, a genotype can be defined as all of the alleles, which we'll talk about in a moment, A-L-L-E-L-E-S, all of the alleles present in an organism. Now, there's a couple of important points here. So the genotype is all of the alleles present in an organism. Genotypes cannot necessarily be seen from the outside. We all have our own individual genotype, okay? But by looking at you, I can't tell what your genotype is. And by looking at me, you wouldn't be able to tell what my genotype is. Our genotypes would be different, okay? And you wouldn't be able to tell whose genotype is like what. So I want you to understand from the get-go that we can't tell, we can't see the genotype, help if I spell genotype, we can't see the genotype of an organism by looking at it. I can't look at you and say you are homozygous recessive but homozygous dominant for these alleles. I can't do it, okay? We can carry out what's known as a karyotype, but we can't see that with our naked eye, okay? Now, I'm going to put in red the final thing on this. This is a bit of a cheat for your exams. The genotype is always shown with 2 letters. Okay? If you are asked to show the genotype in an exam, you are expected to write 2 letters. So we can say always shown as 2 letters. So your genotype is always shown as 2 letters. I haven't got space, but in your books you may wish to add another arrow. I'm just going to add it over here. I'm going to try and use a colour we haven't used. We can say that a genotype is shown on a karyotype. And we would have spoken about that a long time ago, but it's worth mentioning here. So it's shown on a karyotype. So we've said so far that asexual reproduction is a form of reproduction where there's only one parent and fertilization does not take place. My mouse is disconnected and connected again. It makes clones of the parent and the offspring are genetically identical to the parent. It uses mitosis. Sexual reproduction is a form of reproduction where 2 parents are involved and fertilization does take place. The offspring are not genetically identical to the parent, but they will share certain characteristics of the parent, and it relies on meiosis and fertilization. Fertilization is when 2 gametes join, and a gamete is a male or a female sex cell. During sexual reproduction, half of the organism's chromosomes come from the mother's gamete and the other half come from the father's gamete. This makes up the offspring's genotype. A genotype is all of the alleles present in an organism. We can't see the genotype of an organism by looking at it. The only way we can see a genotype is by carrying out making a karyotype, and it's always shown as 2 letters. Okay? I want to focus now on what these are, alleles, and this will make up the bulk of today's lesson. So you can pause the video. That's the beauty of these being recordings. And we're going to start our next one with the word allele. Allele. Okay? Now an allele is simply defined as different forms of the same gene. Different forms of the same gene. Now a good example of this would be eye colour. I personally have green eyes. My dad has brown eyes and my mum has blue eyes. Therefore, I have inherited the allele for green eyes from my parents in one way or another. But my mum and dad would give me a different allele each. My mum may have given me blue eyes and my dad may have given me an allele for green eyes. Okay? So we can put underneath here, we can say, e.g., eye colour, and we can say an organism may have an allele for blue eyes from mum and brown eyes from dad. Now, these are both genes for eye colour. However, they're slightly different. One is for blue eyes and one is for brown eyes. So these would each be alleles for eye colour. Okay? So what I've underlined in that colour would be alleles for eye colour. Okay? So they're both for eye colour, but they're for different colours. Now, for every gene in your body, you have two alleles, one from mum and one from dad. These alleles can be the same and they can be different. So I'm going to put in red because it's important. We can say for each gene in an organism, or we'll put in your body, comma, you have two alleles semicolon, one from mum and one from dad. So for example, we've already mentioned eye colour. You'll get one allele for eye colour from your mum. You'll get one allele for eye colour from your dad. You can get one allele for skin colour from your mum, one allele for skin colour from your dad. One allele for having a particular genetic disorder from mum, and one allele for having a particular genetic disorder from dad. These are all examples of alleles, okay? And it's important that you understand that you have two alleles for each gene in your body, one from mum, one from dad. Now these alleles can either be the same or different. So these alleles can either be the same or different. Okay? And we use very special terms for these. Now, genetics, in my opinion, genetics is very, very easy if you understand the key words. If you don't understand the key words, they might as well be talking to you in a foreign language. But if you understand the key words, it's very straightforward, if I'm honest, particularly at GCSE level. So the first keyword is the term homozygous. Now, the word homo means the same. So the word homo means the same. If you are homosexual, you like people of the same sex. The word zygous means alleles. Or for the case of this, we'll say it does. It means alleles. So if you are homozygous, it means you have the same alleles. So organisms that are homozygous can be defined as an organism with two of, if I spell of correctly, two of the same alleles for a particular gene. Now, if you have the allele for blue eyes from your mom and you have the allele for blue eyes from your dad, you are homozygous for eye colour. My mom and dad are both white, so I got genes from my mom to be white, I got genes from my dad to be white, therefore I am white, and you can say that my genotype is that I am homozygous for white skin colour. Okay? Now, as a bit of a cheat sheet for you guys for your exams, if an organism is homozygous, it either has 2 capital letters or 2 lowercase letters as its genotype. So if it is homozygous, it will always have 2 capital letters or 2 lowercase letters as its genotype. Now, if an organism has 2 different alleles, we use the term heterozygous. 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 The word hetero means different. If you are heterosexual, you like people of a different sex. So the word hetero means different. The word zygous means alleles. So if you are heterozygous, you have 2 different alleles for a particular gene. So a heterozygous is an organism with 2 different alleles for a particular gene. Okay? So a heterozygous organism has 2 different alleles for a particular gene. So if we're going with eye colour again, you may have brown eyes from dad and blue eyes from mum. You would therefore be heterozygous for eye colour. Now, as a bit of a cheat sheet for you guys with your exams, we can say that heterozygous organisms are always shown as 1 capital letter and 1 lowercase letter as its genotype. So heterozygous will always be shown as 1 capital letter and 1 lowercase letter as its genotype. Okay? So, an allele is a different form of the same gene, such as eye colour. You can have alleles for blue eyes, brown eyes, grey eyes, green eyes. Each gene in your body, you have 2 alleles, 1 from your mum and 1 from your dad. These alleles can either be the same or they can be different. If you have 2 of the same alleles, so you get the allele for blue eyes from your mum and allele for blue eyes from your dad, you are said to be homozygous. This will always be shown as either 2 capital letters or 2 lowercase letters. If you are heterozygous, you have two different alleles for a particular gene. So for example, if you get an allele for brown eyes from mom and blue eyes from dad, you are heterozygous for eye colour. Now this means that you have two different alleles for a particular gene, and it will always be shown as one capital letter and one lowercase letter in its genotype. Do not get confused and think it's only about eye colour. We're just using that as an easy example. You'll see in exam questions that this can be asking you about anything, okay? They don't just limit it to humans. You may be asked about genes in plants as well. So again, we'll go on to the final bit of this lesson. The beauty is you can pause the video if you haven't got all of the notes down, or you can certainly go back to it anyway. So if an organism is heterozygous, one allele will always be expressed over the other. So we can say if an organism is heterozygous, comma, one allele will always be expressed over the other. Okay. Now, this is where we bring in some other keywords. The first one is dominant allele. Dominant allele. Now, a dominant allele is always expressed if present. So dominant alleles are alleles that are always expressed if present. So dominant alleles, you only need one of them for them to be expressed. So if you've grown a dominant allele, it is always expressed. These are always shown as a capital letter. So a dominant allele is always shown as a capital letter. Okay. Recessive alleles, a recessive allele is an allele alleles that are only expressed if two copies are present. If two copies are present. Now, recessive alleles are always shown as two lowercase letters. So always shown as two lowercase letters. So let's think of some examples, okay? Oh, we didn't want that. let's think of some examples. So I want you to imagine that a capital B, which is dominant, is the allele for brown eyes. And the lowercase b is the allele for blue eyes. Okay, so we've got a capital B for brown eyes, and we've got a lowercase b for blue eyes. I want you to imagine that we've got mom and dad. So dad, we're going to do in this blue colour. This is the dad, the daddy. And dad has got two capital B's. Mom, on the other hand, I'm going to do in this pink colour. Mom has got one capital B and one lowercase b. Therefore, we can say that dad is homozygous because they are both the same allele. He's got two alleles for brown eyes. Dad is homozygous dominant because they are both capital letters. So we can put underneath dad that he is homozygous dominant. On the other hand, mom has got a capital B and a lowercase b, so she must be heterozygous. We don't need to worry about dominant and recessive. She is just heterozygous. Now this tells us their genotype. It doesn't tell us what we can see on the person. To see what's on the person, we refer to what's known as the phenotype. The phenotype, P-H-E-N-O-T-Y-P-E. The phenotype is the characteristics that are shown / expressed by the organism. So this is what you can actually see on the organism. So I'm going to put underneath here in red what can be seen. On the organism. So if we were thinking about the phenotypes of mom and dad, dad has two dominant alleles and he only needs one dominant allele to be expressed. Because he's got two of them, he can only have brown eyes. So dad's phenotype would be brown eyes. Mom, on the other hand, has got one brown eyes, one blue eyes. But because brown is dominant, it is always expressed, so she will also have brown eyes. So, organisms, if they are heterozygous, one allele is always expressed over the other. Not sure why that's come up. One is always expressed over the other. A dominant allele is an allele that is always expressed if present. It's always shown as a capital letter. Recessive alleles are only expressed if there are two copies present. It's always shown as two lowercase letters. The phenotype are the characteristics that can always be seen on the organism. So if you're asked about what is the phenotype of this organism, you need to say what its characteristic is. Does it have blue eyes? Does it have brown skin? Does it have blonde hair? These are all phenotypes. So hopefully by now, if we can get rid of that, You should be able to recall the two types of reproduction used by living organisms. You should be able to use genetic terms such as genotype, phenotype, homozygous and heterozygous. And you should be able to tell me how some human conditions can be caused by recessive alleles. If you have any questions at all about this lesson, please let me know, either by the usual means, either email me or put a comment in Google Classrooms, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Until the next video, thank you very much.